Well, hi, everybody. I'm Don Stewart, and welcome to a very special edition of Breaking News for this Thursday. It is the 12th day of September, 2024. And what we're going to do today on this edition of Breaking News is something a little bit different than we usually do. Instead of giving a number of stories that have come across the wire in the news, I'm only going to share one story with you, but I think you're going to like it. It's going to be very, very memorable. In fact, it's a story I've been holding on to for over 4.5 years, and I'm finally allowed to tell it. So here it goes. I'm going to use actually another headline to tell this story. It's China's Wuhan Virology Institute creates a naval COVID-19 vaccine for future pandemics. This is from the South China Morning Post. This is going to lead into the story, by the way. Researchers in the Wuhan Institute of Virology in China have developed a nano vaccine candidate that could offer universal protection against all COVID-19 variants, as well as protect against future coronavirus mutants with pandemic potential. The Institute, which has engaged in bat coronavirus research for years, has in recent years been embroiled in controversy and scrutiny from countries, including the United States, over accusations that the COVID-19 pandemic originated from a lab leak at its facilities. All right, here's what we're going to talk about. The Institute in Wuhan, China. What we're going to find out, this was not a natural occurring pandemic, as was said at the beginning of 2020 when the COVID-19 became a worldwide scourge. And it's not a lab leak either. This is not the popular story that's taken place that most people hold on to today. They realize it came from a lab in Wuhan, but they called it a leak from the lab. No, it was a deliberate release by the Chinese Communist Party government. Let me explain why I believe this. In 2021, there was an excellent book written on the subject by an Australian author named Sherry Markson. And what she did, she gave a detailed history of the Chinese Communist Party coronavirus story. And it was clear from the evidence, she's very objective when you read the whole thing, that the virus came from a lab in Wuhan. Now, again, if you remember back in the early 2020, it's like you're wearing one of these tinfoil hats if you said anything, but it was just something that naturally occurred in this wet market in Wuhan, China. And it developed from nature, and it's just one of these scourges that hit the world. And so, anyway, Sherry Markson gave a really detailed history of the story. And like we said, it's clear from the evidence that she gave, and although she was very objective, that it was not a result of contaminated animals at a wet market in Wuhan. Now, interestingly, every source that agreed that it came from the lab said that it escaped with one notable exception. And that was the man named Xi Jinping. Wei Zhengsheng grew up in one of the 500 families that helped founded the Chinese Communist Party in 1949 when the People's Republic of China was established. His defection to U.S. made international headlines in 1977. He rebelled against the upbringing with communist China. He was thrown in jail for a long period of time. He was the only person in this entire story that actually believed the virus was released intentionally. So let's go back to early 2020 when the virus started spreading like wildfire worldwide. One of the countries that was hit was the country of Iran. So I asked my friend Nauder, who we quoted yesterday, if he knew anything about it, and his answer blew my mind. Now, you remember yesterday we mentioned Nauder. He finally let me use his name when he talked about the story that there's actually people in Iran that are paying $5,000, and for $5,000 they're getting legitimate Mexican passports, and they will be flown from Iran to Mexico and also taken to the border where they can walk across the U.S. border with Mexican passports, illegal, be legal as a Mexican citizen or have a Mexican passport when they're actually Iranian citizens. And he said this is something, he said his phone blew up yesterday because I guess a lot of you know Nauder that watched this program and wanted to talk to him about it. He shared that with me today. So I asked him, I said, you still don't want me to do the Wuhan story, do you? And he said, look, it's okay now. It's time you can do it. So when you understand what went on and why I'm saying this now and why I didn't say it at the time, I think you'll see the importance of it. All right. So in the early 2020, we saw the virus spreading, and one of the places it spread it to was Iran. Iran, some of the leaders there got it, some of the people in the country got it. One of the first countries that got a real bad case of it was the country of Iran. So I said, do you know anything about this? And here's the story he told me. Nauder is highly placed with the Christians that are there in Afghanistan and in Iran. And he shared, Don, I got to tell you a story, but you can't tell anybody else. And I said, I won't. And I never have, actually. I've told a couple people, never publicly. He said, I have two friends that are in the Iranian government, high up in the Iranian government, that are Bible believing Christians, but they're secret Christians. The people don't know. They think they're Muslims. They think they're, part of the, radical Shia Islam, but they're not. They believe in Jesus Christ. They love him, but they're in part of the underground Christian movement. They're in Iran, and I'm encouraging them. Two of them. He says neither of them know one another. They don't know the other person's identity and they don't know the other person's a Christian. So he said, I called each of them up and I asked them, do you know anything about this virus, this coronavirus? And he told me they both said the exact same story without, again, knowing the other person, without talking to the other person, not even, ever having anything to do with them. Here's what they said. We said, yes, it is not a lab leak from Wuhan, China. It did not come about by nature. The coronavirus was a bioterroristic weapon that was purposely released, intentionally released upon the world by China in cahoots with North Korea and Iran. And Iran was going to use it basically to try and destroy Israel. And so he said behind it, of course, is, this worldwide pandemic that happened is something that was purposely done by communist China in the year, actually it's 2019 when they started to release it, but in 2020. And so he shared with me, he said, each of these people, each of these, and the government told me this, and then they're very truthful, that this is a bioweapon. It was meant to cause terrorism, bioterrorism worldwide. It was purposely released. It wasn't any leak. And it was done for Iran's sake to get to Israel. And they were talking about, he told me about various ways they were thinking about releasing it in Israel with a flock of birds or something like that flying over, whatever. But the bottom line was, at that time, contrary to what everybody was saying, it was not only from the lab, but it was purposely released from the lab. Now we've come a long way in 4 years. Most people now at least accept the idea that it was, came from the lab, but still people are saying, well, they have very suspect conditions there at the lab. The lab in Wuhan was, in fact, a previous lab that had the SARS virus. There was, some of that escaped from the lab. So it seemed to make sense that, well, if you're going to believe it, it wasn't coming from nature, which they tried to palm off for years. At least it was somehow innocently escaped from the lab. And he said, no, these people are both very clear. Iran did this purposely. China did it purposely, along with North Korea. They wanted this pandemic to spread all around the world. But he said, you can't tell anybody because, first of all, I've got this information from these two people in the parliament. They're Christians, and we can't trace it back to them because, their lives would end at this particular time. So we just got to keep a lid on it. So we did. We didn't say anything because we would look like fools anyway, because at that particular time, everybody believed it was from nature. It was just, just some type of zoonotic, it's called a zoonotic uh, scourge that happened. And of course, the rest, as they say, is history. We saw what happened to the world, the number of people who died, the world economy, how many trillions of dollars were lost because of this. So many things happened. In fact, many people, I almost lost my life. In fact, my wife hadn't taken me to the hospital when she did. In fact, if she didn't get this hydroxy given to her, we both got it at the same time. And she was sick as a dog, and I was even sicker. But someone came by and dropped off some hydroxy for her. In a few hours, she got better, good enough to drive me to the hospital. And if I hadn't been driven to the hospital, I wouldn't have survived. That's how bad I had it. And so it's injured a lot of people. It's killed a lot of people. We've also got the issue of the vaccines that's been used, different ones afterwards, the fallout from that. We won't get into that here. But the point is, it was this horrible worldwide scourge that came about. And again, in 2019, as Sherry Markson said in her book, and then first seen there, then in 2020, it hit the world. But it was interesting. This one person, when I read this, he, former member of family, was members of the founding of the Communist Party, Chinese Communist Party, says, no, I know these people. They would do this purposely. No one else wanted to believe that. Now, I knew at this time, according to what, Nauder's friends there in the Iranian government, they said, yeah, it was purposely released. We helped pay for it. We helped, facilitate it. We helped spread it. And so, I could never say that publicly. So I would usually quote this other person in the book or say, it just seems to me that it is not something that is just by nature. It came from a lab. And I just left it at that, even though I said I don't think it just was a mere accident or a mere lab leak. Anyway, that was back then. And now here we are 4.5 years later. And people are finally admitting, that it did come from the Wuhan lab. Now, again, the question is, was it purposely released or innocent? Most people still think it's innocent, but a lot of people do believe it was purposely released. And this was the intel we got from people that are high up in the Iranian government at the time in 2020 that would be in the know. And they both made it very clear to Nauder. They said, look, this is not an innocent thing that happened. This is a purposely made bioweapon meant to kill many, many people. So that was the origin of it. So there's this story again today about, again, what do we call it here? It said the nasal COVID-19 vaccine for future pandemics. That's all we need. Anyway, bottom line is this, that we live in a world where Jesus warned us about plagues and pestilence at the time of the end. We mentioned that as one of our 25 signs. We're near the end. But there's also bioweapons that have been developed that, are being developed. I remember a number of years ago, I was speaking in Wisconsin at a conference, at a Bible prophecy conference, and they asked me to speak about, some of the signs of the end. And I happened to mention bioweapons and this and that. I didn't go into the COVID-19 thing. And I remember there's one lady in the crowd. She came up to me. She says, "I teach at the university here. I'm a specialist in infectious diseases." And she looked at me in the eyes and says, "You don't know the half of it, of what's out there." And this is the idea that I've gotten to over the years that we've had the Chinese Communist Party. That's why I always call it the Chinese Communist Party coronavirus. It's not the China virus. It's not the coronavirus. It's the Chinese Communist Party coronavirus. That's where it came from. Now, we saw what this did, but this may not be the last one we see. We just don't know. There's things that are being right now made in laboratories around the world that attempt to have the same, if not worse, effect as COVID-19 did. So anyway, I've always been wanting to share the story, never been able to. So I thought I'd take this time to share because Nauder gave me the okay. He said, "Yeah, I mentioned it," because what he said, we need you to know is there are people who believe in Jesus Christ that are in the Iranian parliament. And I said, one of the two has since died, but he says there's other Bible believing Christians in some very high positions in the government. In fact, the country of Iran has the fastest growing church in the world. The underground church there is incredible. I've heard so many wonderful stories about what goes on. In fact, what I found out from Iran, from Nauder, is they really like our material here, our website, Educating Our World, our materials. They've translated it into Farsi and they're using it for teaching purposes. So the gospel's getting out. The revival has gone on. The church is growing. The number of Christians are growing. Fastest growing church per capita in the world. And the second fastest is Afghanistan, where he's also working with the underground church there. So the Lord's doing his work. He's doing some great work. But understand this, we live in a very, very evil world. And it's going to get worse and worse as we get closer to the time of the end. Now, the good news is, as we always say here, that there's an end game to this and that the Lord Jesus Christ will come back. So the blue skies are ahead. But in the meantime, it's going to get very, very difficult and even worse. But we're prepared for that because the Bible warns us about that ahead of time. So again, we're always optimistic here. We always know that at the end of the day, God's going to prevail. God's will be done. But in the meantime, it's going to be difficult. And we just need to encourage one another. That's why we do the stories here every day and always end on a positive note, because we know how this game is going to end. Like we always say, we've read the last chapter of the book, seen the last act of the play, watched the last scene of the movie, and the Bible tells us what's going to happen. Jesus Christ will return, set up his kingdom. A number of events will precede that, including the rapture of the church, where he catches up the believers to be in him. But it's going to be a tough road to hoe. It's going to be quite the roller coaster ride and in the future until the Lord does come back. So we need to be aware of that. And we also need to be aware of, at the end of the day, the Lord Jesus prevails. So anyway, like I said, I've been holding on to this story for 4.5 years and wanted to tell it because it was incredible when he said that. He was just mind-boggling. He said, each of these guys just died. They told me individually without knowing the other person, without even knowing the other person's a Christian, saying the exact same thing, where this thing came from, what they intend to do with it, the collaboration of China, North Korea, and Iran in bringing the scourge on the world. And we saw what had happened. And it was a terrible, terrible thing. And sadly, there may be something in the future which we don't know when and where and how that may be even worse as far as a worldwide pandemic. But in the meantime, we go forward. We thank the Lord that we know Christ, and we're not afraid because we have that blessed hope, the glorious appearing of our great God and Savior, Jesus Christ. So, anyway, this was a very special edition of breaking news. Thank you for putting up with me with this and giving me the chance to share this because I wanted to say it. And the world needs to know it. And so, again, we're 4.5 years plus after the beginning of the pandemic. So we've moved on to so many other things. But this is something I think that needs to be said. And so I'm Don Stewart. As always, thank you so much for watching. Until tomorrow's edition of Breaking News, may the Lord richly, richly bless.